Ladies and gentlemen, let's get into the video. We're going to be discussing a couple of interesting pieces of news which have popped up over the last day or so. The first would be that Intel are going to be once again blocking the overclocking of non-K Skylake processors, and then we're going to be talking about Elder Scrolls Online, because the developers have mentioned that they are indeed working on a DX 12 version of the game for PC, and also that they are looking to improve the performance of the PS4 by utilising the 7th CPU core, and we're also going to have a couple of other very small updates. So, first of all, non-K Skylakes. So, as you may or may not be aware, Skylake officially cannot be overclocked unless you are running the K derivative of the processor. For example, let's say you were to go and purchase the 6700K processor, you can simply use the multiplier or what have you to increase the clock speed of your CPU. No harm, no foul. But a lot of motherboard vendors have been releasing BIOS updates, which essentially allows you to increase the speed of the processor by simply raising the base clock frequency, which of course will then act in conjunction with the processor's built-in multiplier to give you an overclock. Just for simpleness, if you're not too familiar with this, let's say for the sake of argument you have a 10 multiplier and the base clock is 10, then 100, you would take the 10 multiplier times by 100 base clock, and that would give you the final clock speed of the CPU. Now, Intel, at least according to hints, are not very happy about that, because various processors, especially in the lower end of the Skylake range, for example the 6100, the i3 6100, have been doing rather well in the sales and have, I guess you could say, scuppered the sales of the 6600K and the 6700K in the Skylake range. So according to a couple of sources, one of the big ones being Benchlife, who are pretty reputable in the Chinese sector, are pointing out that Intel are going to be pushing BIOS updates which will disable these overclocks. Now bear in mind, this has not been confirmed by Intel. It also would mean that presumably, unless you're going to update your BIOS willingly, it's not going to be automatic, providing that your motherboard doesn't automatically install the latest BIOS update, you should be good to go. However, theoretically, newer motherboards which are going to be sold in, let's say, 3 to 4 months' time, could potentially ship with those updated BIOSes, and it might be a bit of a bugger to downgrade the BIOS. So let's say, for the sake of argument, in 3 months' time you were to buy a motherboard which has the latest BIOS, and let's say that's 1.5, you might have to downgrade the BIOS to, let's say, 1.4 to enable you to overclock. Which might be a bit of a problem, because as we all know, BIOS updates sometimes could be not amazingly helpful. You know, sometimes it can just be slight stability increases, or maybe slight improvements to performance for, let's say, a feature you don't want. In other cases, it can actually be quite nice. For example, increases the amount of CPUs your motherboard supports. It might fix certain issues with an SSD line or whatever. And obviously in those cases it's pretty damn handy to be able to install the latest BIOS. Have to admit, I'm not surprised by this development. I'm actually shocked that it's gone on for so long without Intel making some moves to try and scupper it, because I had a feeling that they were pissed, because let's face it, there was a reason they did this, and it wasn't for lols. So I imagine there were probably some choice words issued when motherboard vendors were deciding to go this route. Time will tell. At the end of the day, it's a free market, so if people get pissed enough, refuse the BIOS update, and then punish Intel for it in the future by, let's say, saying to them, yeah, we're not going to actually install that update, and then for our next processor we'll get AMD. Obviously with Zen coming up, that could be something Intel need to consider. Well, you know, we can only wait and see, I guess. Anyway, moving on to the second piece of news, Elder Scrolls Online. Now, I have to confess, this is one of those titles I always kept meaning to try and then I just didn't. But anyway, ZeniMax Online were talking in their own forums, and they have mentioned that There is no ETA yet, but they are working on a DirectX 12 upgrade which will lead to numerous graphics improvements. Once again, there is no ETA, but they still will be working on it. Now, one of the reasons they're going for this is obviously to increase the level of detail, line of distance transitions, increasing geometry, and just overall better looking game. Now, in terms of consoles, what about the PlayStation 4? So, you might be aware that the Xbox One 7th CPU core was unlocked, and then there were rumours and murmurs that Sony shortly afterwards, and I say shortly in a loose possible sense, several months afterwards, had done very much the same thing. Because remember, both consoles have 8 CPU cores total, however 2 of them initially were cordoned off and said no, we're, for system use only. Microsoft decided to cut this down, so essentially you have a floating amount of performance available for that processor. It's between 50 and 80% depending what the system is doing, so developers have to kind of code accordingly. They can assume that there's at least 50% of the 7th CPU core, however it can fluctuate and they might only get 20% available because the remaining 80% will go to system usage. So that's assuming, however, that they don't need their, I guess you could say, that CPU to do other things, voice commands, that type of stuff in-game will mean that that CPU core is going to be purely used for Connect, so it can't be used for, say, for the sake of argument, issuing commands to the GPU. Sony, as I pointed out, have done very much the same thing. We do have fewer details concerning the percentages of utilization available to developers, unfortunately, but they, at least according to ZeniMax, have said that they are looking to exploit the newly unlocked 7th CPU core, and I said, and I quote, we do have plans to take advantage of the 7th processor core in some capacity, and are still discussing the exact details internally. Now, why am I pointing that out? Because it's not exactly super duper news. It's like, yeah, well, there's a couple of really cool things about that. One, the developers are still tweaking a game which has been released for some time now. They're still tweaking and trying to improve the performance. Remember, the PS4 version is locked at 30 FPS at 1080p. However, sometimes obviously you do still get frame rate tanks. So potentially this additional core could help with that. But the real big piece of news is that there were some rumours for some time that this 7th core was actually available only to first-party developers. So for sake of argument, Naughty Dog. Now, this wasn't 100% confirmed by Sony, so it was just whispers and murmurs. But it's good that we're starting to hear, well, I guess you could say news to the contrary. Finally, a couple of other very small updates. AMD have released a new driver revision for their graphics cards, which is 16.1.1. Normally we don't do driver shoutouts, but both themselves and Nvidia have released new drivers which are crucial to improving the performance of Rise of the Tomb Raider, so definitely install those if you're planning to play Lara Croft's latest adventure. And also, a few folks were commenting on a video I put out a day or two ago. I believe it was Sunday, ? I forgot to check, which makes me a bit of a chimp, regarding the performance of DirectX 12, the performance boost rather of DirectX 12 in Fable. You might recall that I'd mentioned the developers had hinted that it was around a 40% boost if they were utilising DX12 over DX11, and some people had wondered regarding about that, and I had actually done back in March of last year, 2015, a kind of an early technical and performance analysis of the GDC presentation, GDC 2015, which is kind of weird considering we're almost a year from that date. So it's going to be very interesting to see what happens in GDC 2015. I must confess, I'm getting sexually aroused by some of the conversations that I'm hearing. There should be a lot of awesome stuff. Obviously, a lot of stuff regarding Vulkan and DX12, but I do wonder if we're going to start hearing more stuff about the PS4, the Xbox One, maybe want some of the stuff that's been happening in the background, and who knows, maybe some other details as well. However, getting back to the point, and kind of veered off there, during that same presentation there were some actual details regarding the performance and I guess you could say the improvements of Fable with that as well, and you can see that yes, the developers had managed to get roughly that level of performance, and in fact they had issued a live video, and this was showing DX11 running at 900p while DirectX 12 is running at 1080p, which is kind of within the ballpark of performance. And obviously they were using various improvements or various technologies from DX12. For example, they were using various optimal sync, they were using UAV, and they were doing, I believe, execute indirect as well. I'll try to remember to link that article in the video's description, but if not, you can always search for it in redgamingtech.com. Just type in DirectX 12 GDC 2015 and it should pop up. But with all of that said, there's just a bit of an update on that one. Hopefully you've enjoyed the video. I will see you soon. Take care. Bye for now.